Once we're married, I'm not doing housework. She said it like she was reciting a policy, not starting a conversation. We were halfway through dinner, a quiet Thursday night at a small restaurant downtown. She didn't laugh, didn't even look up, just cut into her salmon, took a sip of wine, and added, "If you want the house clean or your shirts ironed, hire someone." For a second I thought I misheard her. Maybe she was joking, just testing a reaction. But her tone stayed steady, calm, confident, the kind of confidence that only comes when someone truly believes what they're saying. I stared at her for a beat, waiting for a smile. Nothing. She didn't even flinch. The candlelight flickered between us, and for a moment I wondered if anyone else in the restaurant could feel how fast the air had shifted. "You're serious?" I asked. She nodded once, her expression neutral. "Of course. You make more than me. I don't see why I should spend my nights scrubbing floors after working all day. That's not how I picture marriage." Her voice was soft but precise, like she'd practiced this conversation before, rehearsed each line until it sounded perfectly reasonable. That was the part that stuck with me. This wasn't a spontaneous comment. It was a declaration. I sat there, saying nothing. My brain was processing it the way it processes a data input, detached, methodical, running quiet calculations in the background. I looked at her, Vanessa, 29, sharp, beautiful, composed. The kind of woman who plans everything. Even this. She had a way of speaking that always sounded efficient, like she was pitching a strategy rather than sharing a thought. When we first met, that confidence pulled me in. I liked how direct she was. I liked how she never hesitated. But sitting there that night, watching her calmly dismantle what I thought partnership meant, that same confidence felt like something else entirely. Entitlement, maybe. Control, definitely. She placed her fork down, folded the napkin beside her plate, and looked straight at me. "You don't think that's unreasonable, do you?" I exhaled slowly. "Not necessarily," I said, carefully choosing each word, my tone neutral, my face unreadable. Sometimes silence tells you more about a person than any argument ever could. She smiled slightly, satisfied, as if she'd just won something I didn't realize we were competing for. "I knew you'd understand," she said. "You're not one of those guys who expects a woman to play maid." Her words hung between us, heavy and deliberate. I nodded once, mechanically, and that was it. The moment I knew something fundamental had shifted. No anger, no disappointment, just clarity. The kind of cold, quiet clarity that comes when you finally see a person exactly as they are. I didn't react because there was no point. I just watched her talk about wedding colors and venues like the previous 5 minutes had never happened. And while she was already planning the reception menu, I was silently rewriting the guest list, one that no longer included her. Vanessa and I had been together for 3 years. We met at a networking event back in Chicago. She was standing by the bar, holding a glass of white wine, scanning the room the way a person does when they already know they're the most composed one there. I remember thinking she looked like the kind of woman who had her entire life mapped out in color-coded folders. I wasn't wrong. She told me she worked in marketing, ambitious, goal-oriented, married to her career. That's how she described herself. I joked that I was married to spreadsheets. She smiled. That was all it took. She wasn't warm, not in the usual sense. But there was something magnetic about how precise she was. The way she spoke, moved, made decisions, like every action had a purpose. It drew me in because it made me feel stable. I liked how predictable she seemed, how easy everything was. I mistook control for compatibility. We started dating seriously within a few months. We shared similar work ethics, similar schedules, similar ambitions. I didn't realize at the time that similar doesn't mean shared. She was the kind of person who needed to be ahead of time, of expectations, of people. I never minded that. I figured that's just who she was. I've never liked drama, so I let things slide. A year later, we moved in together. A clean, minimalist apartment on the north side, white walls, glass coffee table. One of those decorative plants that looked real but wasn't. We agreed to split everything 50-50. Bills, rent, chores. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. I did most of the cooking. She handled groceries and laundry. On weekends, we'd clean together, headphones in, working quietly side by side. It felt balanced. Not romantic, but efficient. And efficiency, to us, was comfort. That balance started shifting slowly, almost invisibly. It began with jokes, small, harmless ones. She'd hand me the vacuum and say, "You're so good at this. You're practically domestic." Or she'd sit on the couch, scrolling her phone while I cooked, and say, "You're totally husband material." It sounded affectionate at first. Until it did, then came the small changes. She stopped doing laundry because, according to her, you fold better than I do. She stopped buying groceries because you know what you like. I didn't argue. I told myself it was temporary. She was stressed, tired, burnt out. I'd cover for a while. That's what partners do, right? But a few months before we got engaged, she started talking differently. Subtle shifts in language. Words like expectations, standards, roles. It wasn't about us anymore. It was about what she was or wasn't willing to do. I'd mention how exhausting work had been, and she'd reply, "That's why I can't imagine doing chores after marriage. I need my downtime." Downtime. It was her favorite word. It started showing up in every conversation. Downtime after work, downtime on weekends, downtime after dinner. Somehow, every part of her life started to revolve around conserving energy, her energy. Mine didn't seem to count. When we got engaged, I thought it would bring us closer. Instead, it introduced something new, structure. Her version of it. Every conversation became a negotiation. Guest lists, seating charts, honeymoon plans, all carried the same undercurrent of control. She didn't want a wedding. She wanted a system, and through all of it, I kept quiet. Because that's who I am. I like to observe before reacting. I take mental notes, build patterns, and wait for confirmation. I don't accuse, I verify. And that night, at the restaurant, when she said she wasn't doing housework, that was my confirmation. Looking back, I think she'd been building up to that line for months, testing how far she could go, measuring how much I'd absorb before pushing back. And when I didn't, she mistook my silence for acceptance. That's the thing about people like Vanessa. They don't yell, they don't demand. They simply declare, calmly, with a smile, expecting the world to adjust. And most of the time, the world does. But not always. Because sometimes, the world just sits back, listens carefully, and quietly decides that it's done. It didn't happen all at once. The tension didn't start with shouting or big arguments. It started quietly. Like a change in temperature you don't notice until you're already cold at first. It was the jokes. The little comments she slipped into casual conversations, coated in playfulness but edged with meaning. "You'll be such a good husband," she'd say, tossing her shoes aside after work. "You already do all the boring stuff, cooking, dishes, cleaning. You're basically trained." That word, trained, stuck with me, not because of what it meant, but because of how naturally she said it. It wasn't teasing. It was ... predictive, like she was setting the tone for what came next. There were other moments too, small, seemingly harmless ones that now feel like data points in hindsight. She'd talk about her co-workers' husbands, men who handled everything, men she called keepers. Or she'd sigh when I asked her to help unload groceries, saying, "You're better at organizing. I'll just mess it up." At the time, I brushed it off. I told myself she was tired, maybe joking, maybe insecure about how she fit into our domestic life. I didn't want to make something out of nothing, but the truth is, it wasn't nothing. It was a slow recalibration of balance, of expectations, of who we were to each other. Then came the first real test. It was a Saturday morning. I'd just finished cleaning the kitchen, and I asked her if she could fold the laundry while I ran to the store. She looked at me like I'd asked her to rebuild the roof. "I have a work call," she said. "You can just do it later. You're faster anyway." Her tone wasn't sharp. It was flat. I remember standing there, holding my keys, realizing this wasn't a favor anymore. It was an assumption. After that, the pattern became routine. I'd cook dinner. She'd eat, say thank you, and move straight to the couch with her laptop. I'd do laundry. She'd comment that it looked perfect, like a hotel. I told myself it was fine, temporary, a rough patch. Everyone has them. But then she started saying things like, "I can't wait to finally relax when we're married." Or, "You'll make such a great husband, the kind that doesn't complain." Always half a laugh, half a warning. One night, while watching TV, she said it again once we're married. "I'm done doing housework." This time, I looked at her. "You mean like splitting chores differently?" I asked. She didn't even glance up from her phone. "No, I mean done. You make more, so you handle it. Or hire someone. That's how modern couples do it." There was no emotion behind her voice, just logic. She'd already decided. I didn't argue. I just stared at the TV, not seeing a thing. Because something about that calm certainty told me arguing would be pointless. She wasn't looking for discussion. She was informing me of a fact. Later that night, when she fell asleep beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. And it wasn't anger I felt. It was calculation. A quiet process of connecting everything she'd said. Every small moment that led up to this one. Every boundary I'd silently allowed to shift. By morning, I realized something simple. She hadn't changed. She'd just stopped pretending. I chose to bring it up on a quiet evening. It had just rained, the air was cool, and the apartment was still. She was sitting on the couch, legs crossed, phone in hand, scrolling as if the world outside that screen didn't exist. I sat across from her, voice steady. "I want to revisit what you said the other day," I began. "About not doing any housework after we get married." She didn't look up right away. Her finger kept moving across the screen for a few more seconds before she finally paused. "Yeah, what about it?" "I just want to understand clearly," I said. "You mean you're not planning to do any household chores at all?" "Correct," she replied simply. I already told you. I'm exhausted. I work all day, and when I come home, I want to rest. I don't have time or energy to clean or do laundry anymore. I nodded slowly. I get that. But what if I work all day too? Does making a little more money automatically mean I have to handle everything else? She finally looked up, her face calm, her tone polite, like someone explaining a spreadsheet. You can afford it. Just hire someone. It's simple. That's what people do when they're efficient. I'm not saying you have to do it yourself. I just don't want to. Her words were soft, but they hit like a clean strike. Cold, neat, emotionless. I waited a few seconds before asking, so what does partnership look like to you then? What's your definition of balance? She leaned back, thoughtful, like she was teaching a concept she'd mastered long ago. You handle finances, logistics, practical things. I'll handle emotional labor, family, holidays, birthdays, social connections. That's equal. I looked at her quietly. That sounds less like a marriage and more like a contract. She shrugged. Marriage is a contract. People just romanticize it. That was the first time she said something that didn't make me angry, just clear. I realized she wasn't being manipulative. She was being literal. She viewed love like a structure to manage, not something to feel. She didn't want partnership. She wanted distribution of labor, hers lighter, mine heavier, as long as it made sense on paper. I leaned back, voice low. Do you ever think what happens to love when you start measuring it by effort and time? She smiled faintly. I think it gets more realistic. I don't need fairy tales. I need stability. I nodded again. Stability for you. But what about me? She looked at me for a second, expression calm, almost puzzled. You're already stable. That's why I chose you. The sentence landed quietly, but it was final. There was no malice, just clarity and complete absence of self-awareness. I looked at her and said softly, I'm not angry. I just realized something tonight. She tilted her head. What's that? When someone tells you exactly who they are, I said, believe them the first time. She didn't respond. Maybe she didn't understand, or maybe she didn't care to. Either way, the conversation was over for her. For me, it was closure disguised as calm. I stood up, took the wine glasses from the table, carried them to the kitchen. She stayed where she was, scrolling her phone again, already detached from the moment. That was when I understood. Some people mistake silence for agreement. But that night, my silence wasn't agreement. It was the beginning of my exit. After that conversation, neither of us brought it up again. There was no argument, no reconciliation, just a silence that settled into the space between us, steady, cold, and precise. She still went to work. I still made coffee every morning. I cooked dinner, washed dishes, folded laundry. On the surface, nothing had changed. But underneath, everything had already ended. The death of a relationship doesn't come with noise. It comes quietly, in the way two people stop looking at each other. In the way good morning turns into routine. And in how a closed door no longer invites a response. She began acting as if that dinner conversation had been an agreement, not a warning. She stopped doing anything around the house. Not out of laziness, but intention. I could tell she was testing me. She'd leave dishes piled up for 2 days straight, not because she forgot, but because she wanted to see if I'd step in. I did. Not because I was weak, but because I wanted to observe how far she'd go. Over time, her indifference became deliberate. Laundry stayed untouched. Trash bins overflowed. When I cleaned, she'd sit on the couch, scrolling her phone, and casually say, "See, life's still fine. I think this is how we should live after we're married." I didn't respond. I just kept washing the dishes, watching the water run over my hands, clear and cold. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even disappointed. What I felt was stillness, the kind that comes after you've stopped hoping for things to change. I started noticing details the way an analyst tracks patterns. Every word, every behavior, every quiet manipulation, logged, stored, analyzed. I saw the way she avoided responsibility but still believed she was being fair. The way she smiled while saying things that cut deep, completely unaware of what they revealed. The way she justified everything under the label of efficiency and modern thinking. One night, she sent me a TikTok. It was a woman bragging about how her husband did all the chores while she protected her feminine energy. Vanessa captioned it, "See, I'm not crazy." I looked at it for a moment, set my phone down, and said nothing. She went to bed early that night. I stayed in the living room, lights off except for the dim glow from the kitchen. The apartment was clean, quiet, almost sterile. Everything in its place because I had put it there. And for the first time, I realized she was right about one thing. The stability she wanted existed, just not in the way she imagined. It wasn't us holding it together. It was me, alone. I sat there for a long time, thinking about how some endings don't come with fights or tears. Sometimes they come with silence, the kind that feels final, not empty. That was the night I stopped planning a future with her. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't need to. The decision had already formed, quiet and clean, like a lock clicking shut. She hadn't changed. She had simply stopped pretending. And I finally stopped pretending to asterisk. After that night, we never really talked again. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because nothing worth saying would change anything. Everything was already decided, neatly, silently, like an unsigned contract both parties had already agreed to. I stopped trying to fix it. I just observed, calculated, and prepared to leave. Not out of anger or revenge, but out of clarity. She, meanwhile, kept living as if nothing had changed. She laughed, she worked. She sent me funny videos and talked about wedding plans, about honeymoons, about our future. Sometimes she'd lean her head on my shoulder while we watched TV and whisper, "I know we're going to be so happy." I didn't respond. I just smiled, the kind of polite smile people give when the conversation is over but the other person doesn't realize it. Inside, I wasn't hurt anymore. I wasn't sad, just empty, in the clean, quiet way you feel after a storm has passed and there's nothing left to rebuild. I began to pull away, quietly. I stopped waking her up in the mornings. I stopped texting her at work. I still cooked, still helped when she asked, but my effort was mechanical, gestures, not feelings. If she spoke, I answered. If she stayed silent, so did I. We'd become two people sharing a space, not a life. She didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't want to. In her mind, silence meant agreement, and my calmness looked like peace. So she relaxed. She came home later, spent hours on the phone with friends. Once, when I looked her way, she said lightly, "Don't worry, it's just a call." I nodded. I wasn't jealous, because jealousy requires hope. and I had none left. I stopped arguing about the little things, the bills, the chores, the wedding plans. When she said, "I booked another venue to check out this weekend," I replied, "Whatever you think." Those 3 words weren't agreement. They were the sound of someone quietly stepping out of a story that no longer made sense. Over time, I began to feel like I was watching my own life from the outside. I was still there, present, polite, functional, but detached. She'd talk, I'd listen. She'd laugh, I'd nod. My reactions became automatic. We were maintaining the shape of a relationship that no longer had substance. I started organizing my things, slowly, intentionally, one drawer at a time. She didn't notice. She thought I was just cleaning up, like always. But every item I packed away was a step toward absence. At night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain tapping the window. Her breathing beside me used to comfort me. Now, it only reminded me how far apart we really were. One morning, I woke up before dawn. The apartment was quiet, perfectly tidy, the way she liked it. It looked peaceful, stable, lifeless. I made coffee and stood there for a while, looking around. She had gotten what she wanted, a life with no conflict, no noise, no mess. But what she didn't realize was that sometimes stability is just another word for emptiness. I looked around at everything we'd built, the framed pictures, the set of glasses she loved, the couch she said we'd grow old together on, all still there, just hollow now. I put my cup down, and something inside me just settled. No grand realization, no anger, no sadness, just certainty. I was leaving, no fight, no goodbye, no scene. Because when you truly decide to leave, you don't need an audience. You just go. I took a few more days to organize things, not because I had to, but because I wanted to leave it neat, the same way I'd tried to keep the relationship intact, carefully, respectfully, quietly. Then one morning, while she was still asleep, I set my keys on the table, right where she always put her purse. No note, no message, nothing to interpret, because I didn't want my departure to feel like a speech. I wanted it to be an act. I opened the door and stepped out. The hallway was empty, the air still. Behind me, the door clicked shut, soft, final dot. And in that small sound, I finally understood something she never would. The stability she always wanted had finally arrived. It just no longer included me. I left that apartment on a grey morning. No rain, no sunlight, just the kind of sky that feels suspended between 2 seasons. The city was still half asleep. I walked slowly, carrying a small suitcase, just a few clothes, a few essentials. Everything else I left behind. Not because I forgot, but because I no longer belonged to that version of my life. When the door clicked shut behind me, it was soft but final. That sound, one small click, felt like punctuation. No goodbye, no confrontation, no explanations, just closure. The first few days alone weren't easy. I still made 2 cups of coffee out of habit, then watched one grow cold on the table. Sometimes I'd turn when I heard footsteps outside, expecting her voice, but no one came. The silence was heavy, but not cruel. It was clean. A silence that didn't suffocate, it cleared the air. I rented a small place on the edge of town. Every morning, I'd open the window, let the cold air hit my face, and remind myself that this was mine, my space, my pace, my life. Slowly, the emptiness stopped feeling like loss and started feeling like peace. I began reading again, listening to quiet music, writing small notes to myself. Not to remember her, but to remember who I was before all of this. Before I confused love with obligation. Once, I passed a home store and saw the same set of glasses she'd chosen for our apartment. I stopped for a moment, expecting a wave of nostalgia, but nothing came. No ache, no sting, just calm recognition, a memory that had finally lost its weight. That's when I realized, when a memory stops hurting, it's no longer a wound. It's just something that happened. A friend asked me once, "Do you regret leaving her?" I thought for a moment and said, "No," because I didn't really leave her the day I walked out. I left the moment she stopped listening. That's the truth. Love doesn't die when people stop caring. It dies when they stop hearing each other, when conversations turn into transactions, when affection becomes routine, and once that happens, leaving isn't betrayal, it's self-preservation. I've learned there are two kinds of silence in a relationship. One that means peace, and one that means absence. The second kind feels almost identical until you realize the warmth is gone. She wasn't evil. She wasn't cruel. She just wanted what she believed would keep her safe: stability, predictability, control. But in her pursuit of those things, she forgot that love, by nature, isn't supposed to be efficient. It's supposed to be alive, and I wanted something different. Not perfection, not certainty, just honesty. I wanted someone who'd be willing to stumble with me, not just walk beside me when the path was smooth. I used to think leaving was failure, but it's not. Sometimes walking away is the most honest form of love, the kind you give yourself when you realize staying means losing who you are. Months later, I heard she'd moved in with friends, started a new job, looked happy. I didn't feel curiosity or jealousy, just relief, because the story was over and both of us finally had what we wanted. She had her version of peace, and I had mine. One afternoon, I sat in a cafe downtown, sunlight cutting through the window, scattering gold across the table. I watched people pass, each one carrying their own stories, their own quiet heartbreaks. And I thought, maybe everyone has one relationship like that, the kind that breaks you open, forces you to look at yourself, and leaves without apology. And when you finally understand it, you stop trying to win in love. You just try to stay honest. Because if you can walk away without losing yourself, that's already victory. Now, I don't want perfection anymore. I don't want guarantees. I just want someone real, someone who can argue, laugh, and rebuild with me. And if I never find that, I'll still be fine. Because peace isn't about who stays. It's about who you become when they leave. That evening, I left the cafe and walked down the street. The air was cool, calm, grey, but I wasn't sad. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I was free. Sometimes, freedom doesn't come when someone opens the door for you. It comes the moment you realize you can walk through it on your own.